My name is Karen. I'm Director of Enterprise Marketing at Cvent. How many of you are familiar with Cvent? Yes. Head nods, head nods. This audience, I would hope so. We really have a problem with our marketing. What I've been talking about actually over the course of this year, I joined Cvent about a year ago, and there's been really interesting conversation, particularly as we come out of the pandemic, and I know we're far away from that now, so I'm gonna not try and make it all about that, is this change that's almost happened as we think about events as part of a marketing strategy. I started my career in events. How many of you sit in a marketing org as opposed to like a meeting and events org? Anyone? Do you guys have a separate meeting and events team from your marketing? So generally you sit near the marketers all day long? Great. Part of the challenge that I had, even though I was the same way, I reported up in brand and this and that, yet events wasn't necessarily seen as an integral part sometimes of marketing. And how many of you are, I'm assuming all of you are event professionals, correct? Work in the events space? Brilliant. So this is a talk that I generally do to marketers to convince them of the importance, but I thought what would be interesting today is talk to you a little bit about this and perhaps give you some ideas and things to think about to go back into your organization if you do sometimes struggle with showing the value of marketing and ROI. And I think that's become even more acute in the past few years because there's a term, I don't know how many of you have come across it, that marketers tend to love. If I can make my slides drive. And it's this idea of omni-channel marketing. It's a buzzword that's a favorite of marketing leaders in particular. Frost and Sullivan have a very specific definition for it. I'm going to read it off. It's the seamless and effortless, high-quality customer experiences that occur within and between contact channels. But for today's digital-first world, and particularly as people who work in digital marketing, sometimes I find when I talk to marketing leaders in particular, like up at the senior levels of organizations, they forget that events could be part of that. And that digitization, oh my God, I can't use my words, becomes really interesting. And ultimately, if you're thinking about a broad omni-channel strategy, how events can fit in works whether you're working a B2B or B2C. So, come on, there we go. So another question, another hand raiser. How many of you would say that your organization's priority is brand building? One. Demand as a priority. What else would there be? And obviously, there's a mix of both of these. Certainly at Cvent, part of the challenge when I joined about a year ago is that, particularly for large organizations, they hadn't even heard of us. So we had some brand building to do, but obviously where you drive revenue is driving those leads to sales. So, ultimately, senior marketers are going to care about both of these things, and that's going to come up for all of you. And when you think about that demand, events marketing, I think sometimes isn't always seen. Like people see going to events as a brand building exercise, and I think where it becomes, we all have tech that we're using. Everyone's using Cvent today, I hope, to grab leads when you go around to the different exhibitors. But we still see people doing, how many of you would still collect business cards at shows sometimes? Or find that you're doing LinkedIn trading or things that I remember when I did events, and I'm dating myself, you would have lead cards, and I would hand those leads cards over to my client, and I would walk into the office and they would be piled up against the wall. So if you're doing that, and even in today's world, as many companies still do that, you're missing out on all that opportunity to get value. And when you get into a digital construct, sometimes you might not even be capturing that information. So where it becomes interesting for all of you as event professionals, and certainly, and one of the things that we look at is how we think about driving engagement. And particularly off the back of pandemic, businesses are going to demand all their leaders to be looking at things to be data first and digital first. And events can play a really good role in that because anything that all of you do is about driving engagement, whether it's in the room, whether it's online. How many of you currently do both virtual as well as in real life events? Say all of you. How many of you who might have been in this space before the pandemic were doing digital events? less. And this is where it's become really interesting. So when we think about those opportunities, it's how do we think about events as part of a comprehensive strategy and how that can contribute in a really meaningful way. And here's some interesting data to kind of back that up. When you think about the types of events that are being done, and this is off some varying data that we've pulled in, 75% of marketers found in-person events to actually be the most effective. Yet, and what's also interesting is that 93% of consumers felt that live events actually had a larger influence than TV ads. So that real world thing becomes very important. And that active nature of meeting people face to face provides a much greater depth of connection between your audience and your organization. And it certainly is going to have more of an impact than more passive forms of marketing. And if you'll indulge me, what's really interesting behind these stats is that both of these are obviously referencing in-person events. And so there's a lot of work to be done to recognize that everything doesn't have to be digital. I spent a lot of time, and before I worked at an event platform that spent a lot of time doing live events, talking a lot about, it's when we look at all the different channels, sometimes we forget that in the room can actually have as much impact as that world of digital, because digital was easy and it was fast and you could change it all the time. So it's this bringing all of this together that is an opportunity within organizations to do that. And ultimately then the power of digital, and what's interesting now, can be transferred into real life scenarios. Because if you bring in the learnings and successes, particularly for what we've had to go through during the pandemic, into a real world scenario, that power of the data you can access and the engagement you can get becomes incredibly important as you drive your business. Why are you not advancing? There we go. So what's really interesting about this is the effectiveness and how we're delivering value. And that's really hard to read, but what this comes down to, and it's based on a CMO Council set of research that we did earlier this year. And when we asked these senior leaders about the effectiveness of executing events that deliver value, the findings were a little disappointing. Not surprising, but disappointing, especially when it came to things like hybrid and virtual events, hybrid in particular. They knew they were valuable, but they weren't really sure if they were doing them very, very well. And so what you run into this is opportunity. How we think about all these different types of events that we create and the power that they can have when we think about the data that is driven off of them becomes very, very compelling. And if we're recognized that we can do better, all of you in this room have this opportunity as individuals and in the work that you do in your organizations to show even more value than you might have even thought possible. And ultimately what this comes down to, and what we like to talk about, is the effectiveness that you can be bringing, and what we like to call the power of engagement. And, don't feedback, please. And ultimately, as I've said, digital doesn't have to mean virtual. And you can still use all the tech that you might use in virtual to have an impact in real life. And so all of these things can come together, and you can differentiate your experiences while you do it. So let me use an example. And the example becomes is one that we know quite well because it's Cvent. We're an event technology company. We've been in business for over 20 years. For about 18 and a half of those, it was all about live event. So what you experience today, the badge you're wearing, bringing in the mobile aspect, everything that happens kind of in the room. And that was great, and we were grabbing in little touch points, and those in-person events gave you a depth of engagement. So pre-pandemic, it was all about that depth of engagement. If you were doing virtual or doing anything at all, it was probably your internal meetings, and anything else you were doing was digital marketing. So you had your teams over here doing digital marketing, and you had your events team over here, because never did they cross, because one was in person and the other one was online. Well, then the pandemic hits, right? Uh-oh. Can't do in the room anymore. So what happened for us in particular was, because we have a very distinct meeting and events team, and we have a very distinct demand gen team. and market and product team. So I sat over in demand gen land. The M&E team would be over there really strong. I would say some of the best event professionals I've met. But we didn't really talk to each other. And in fact, when we did, it almost became this kind of who's doing what, or a battle of what's impactful and effective, et cetera, et cetera. Well, suddenly, all those people who had been using our technology, and our technology itself had to be restructured to work in a virtual construct. They rebuilt the entire Cvent platform in about 4 months. And so suddenly, digital marketing and events had to work together in a way that we hadn't seen before. And then post-pandemic, what we've been seeing and what's become very interesting is, first off, the teams just work better together because we get each other now. I mean, I had to go produce an event. I'm in the technology going, as in the same way that a lot of the folks on the M&E side are suddenly understanding the power of, whether that's demand gen to help drive registrations to events and things like that, that were probably there, but they didn't really understand the depth of that opportunity. So we're seeing this back and forth of these things working together in a way. And then, of course, when you start doing hybrid events, it's this almost best of both worlds that you can create. So ultimately, as hybrid becomes key, how many of you are having to manage hybrid events today? The world, I think, is not going to necessarily go back to where it was. I think we'd all agree that there's this new advancement that's happened from this. And based on some data and research that we've done, the data tells us that 59% of our events of people's events are generally going hybrid. And that 60% of companies expect to hold at least one hybrid event a year. And I think the other thing that's really fascinating was the technology advances, particularly through 2020. We saw a 290% increase in virtual meetings. That's from the GBTA, no surprise there. But the curve of technology adoption went up like 8x what it would have done normally in a matter of months. So as all these things come together, the power of hybrid becomes this bringing together of the best of both worlds across both in-person and live. So as hybrid becomes key, and I love this McKinsey quote, COVID-19 has speeded the adoption of digital technologies by several years. So you've taken this short compressed period of time, particularly at the start of the pandemic, and compressed that down. And you can see some of the data here that we're seeing a 6 to 10x increase in virtual registrations over in person. And even some of this data now was earlier this year. So in fact, I want to go and take a look and see how much has changed as we've come out of this pandemic, because we all like being back in the room with each other. But ultimately, 76% of planners are now finding that virtual world, that we all still need to think about that and consider how that comes together with the live events that we're producing. So what we find and what we love to talk about is this idea, and again, of driving engagement. And whether you're in person or virtual, digital and digital technology and platforms enable you to paint a full picture of your customer. When you think about even this in real world experience, you went online and you registered. You came in, you picked up your badge. You might have had a look around at the conference agenda. You then came, you attended sessions. You will give feedback on this session. Please be kind. You're going to go visit things, and if this is a hybrid event and there was virtual stands, you might visit a virtual booth. You're going to look at content after the fact. You might then attend things. But if you, as a customer, to any or your customers come in, you can suddenly get this entire view of a customer that before you might not have been able to do. And this even happens whether you're at an in-person event or in virtual, because I think the perception, certainly even a year ago, was, well, I'm not going to get this kind of robust view unless it's a virtual online experience, because then I can track all those touch points. I can drop all those breadcrumbs. You can get those breadcrumbs here. And ultimately what that does for your marketing department is they get a clearer picture of their customer. They know who they're talking to. They can adapt we can adapt the content, all of those things. And for a lot of companies, and particularly in the marketing side, they still haven't almost wrapped their head around that a little bit. And so we find sometimes that we're getting into the room with marketers just to have that kind of a dialogue and to make those connection points. Because even when the events teams report in, sometimes it just doesn't click to the power of what platforms, in particular, what the technology can inform, regardless of what type of event you're doing. So coming back to the example of Cvent, we have a huge event every year. coming up in 2 weeks for Europe. That'll be my shameless plug at the end of this. If you want a couple days of interesting content and fun. And we call it Cvent Connect. We do an event in North America, usually in the spring, early summer, and then we do one here in Europe in the fall. So 2019, Vegas event, everyone gets on the airplane, they fly to Vegas, happy days. We had about 2,000 to 3,000 attendees. We got all sorts of data points off of them. We walked away, huge success, very happy. And we got all sorts of information on them. We had our engagement scores. Off we went, the sales team went and did their job. Well, then 2020 hit. Uh-oh. We can't go in person. What are we gonna do? First, the product teams rebuilt the platform. Then we did the event fully virtual. Now, when you suddenly went virtual, you went from this depth of engagement to breadth. Anyone could attend anywhere in the world. They could see the content in real life. They could watch it on demand. So you could register up. If it was 2 o'clock in the morning, you could just wake up in the morning and watch it. So we went from getting thousands of engagement touch points from the in-person to having, and 2,000 to 3,000 people, to 30 or 40,000 around the world, and gathering in just 2 days 1.1 million data points on the people that were engaged. I mean, that's huge. And so suddenly as marketers, we were like, oh my God, this is heaven. And virtual should be the way forward, and isn't this fantastic? But because of the platform we came into last year, we decided to go hybrid. Now, I'm not going to pretend that hybrid is easy, and there's been other sessions to talking about the challenges and the positive things of hybrid. But even with going hybrid and having people in the room, yet still offering this virtual experience, we had less people fully engaged. We didn't have the 30,000. Might have been more around 10 when you looked at all the events. We still managed to get just under 1 million data touch points. So when you think about this power, and the beauty thing is it was all integrated in one platform. Someone came up to me today, it's like, if I scan a badge and my colleague scans a badge, they all go to one place. We're like, yeah. So no card shuffling, no uploading, no hoping someone connects with the right LinkedIn thing. You get this information, and then you get more to better understand what content people are engaging with, what they liked, what they didn't, and taking all that, because as event professionals, we suddenly have the power of saying, look at all this information. So particularly if your demand gen teams or whatever sit separately, you now suddenly, as in the roles that you do all day, have it's not that you didn't have value before, but now you can validate that value even more because you have all this data informed with tools at your hands that in some cases might not have even existed pre-pandemic. So by going hybrid, we suddenly had a lot of information that we didn't even realize that we had access to. Catching up on my notes. Oh, come on, machine. Sorry. All right, we're going to keep going. So I think what becomes really interesting here is when you had your live events before, you might have gotten certain amounts of data. So you might always sit there going, we already had all this data. But how quickly could you access that information and do something with it, depending on what technology you were using? With the technology that you can have access to today, suddenly you have a higher quality in the data that you're capturing, and that's the power of all of these things coming together, because you're suddenly able to, oh my gosh, why is my machine freezing on me? Sorry. There we go. There we go. So with all those data points, you bring all this power at your fingertips that you can then use to talk about and drive the business forward and show that return on the investment, or more importantly, your return on your marketing investment, which is what a lot of folks think about. So having a fully integrated picture and understanding what events produce, because you get the high quality, high volume data and insights, and ultimately you can personalize and improve your targeting when suddenly you have all these data points to hand, and that enables more insightful content across all the other areas. Because even this event we're doing right now, hi mom, we're on camera, that content can then get used in a myriad of different ways. And I'm sure all of you, when you start looking at things now with live experiences, you're able to capture this and break it up into smaller bite-sized content for social. You can use it as a teaser for your email. So whereas I would posit as a marketer and a former events person, the power of events, I don't think a lot of marketers really understood until really in the past few years in ways, and what they could do by bringing those things together in a more impactful way. And ultimately, if you don't have that, everything's going to suffer. You have fewer data points to actually bring over to your marketing teams, fewer leads. And you're missing insights and personalization that people may not have even realized that you had. So when you're using technology in that way, regardless of the type of event you're doing, that all feeds into the systems that drive the other parts of the marketing engine. So I think this power becomes really interesting. Why is this slide here? There we go. So I think what also becomes very important here is how we think about events as within the customer journey. And this is another thing that I even talk with the sales teams about. It's like, do you understand how important events is in a selling cycle? Because if you look through this journey, whether it's at the top of the funnel, that awareness phase, all the way through to after they purchased, there are different touch points where you're going to do webinars, experientials, and all those things. So if all that data is coming together into one place, again, it's just improving your understanding of your customers. You're able to better align the right kind of content at the right part of the journey, and you're able to actually drive things through, showing the value of events in a way that I think a lot of organizations just haven't taken advantage of to date, or are still trying to better understand which technology is going to help enable that for them. So the other thing that's been really interesting when we start looking at post-pandemic and things like that is this bringing together the best of both worlds. Because face-to-face, because when we're done here, we can come and have a chat. You can network. You're going to meet others. I think we all, whether it's Zoom fatigue or just our comfort level of being staring at a screen, you don't get that power of that engagement. Face-to-face, people will ask me quite a bit, well, what type of event should I do? It's like, well, what are you trying to achieve? If you want to achieve building, whether it's community or networking or really deeply understanding your customers, you've got to get them in the room. If you're educating people, you're doing some training, if you want to reach a broad number of people with a message all at the same time, then virtual might be your way to go. If you're in a position to bring those together, so you can find that intersective value, do it. But I think really these past couple of years has shown the power of bringing these together in a way that we might not have thought about. And ultimately, as you work across your teams, and this is something we talk a lot about on the marketing side as well, or certainly like demand gen marketers and people like that, it's like if you're not talking to all of you, you're missing an opportunity. The pandemic, I think, was a forcing function for that, but I think it can become easy to go right back into your silos, depending on your structure of your organization. So the power, again, in building stronger programs, building better quality events, because you're learning from that from your counterparts, perhaps, who don't work in events, and more importantly, what events professionals are showing them, it drives a significant benefit. So if any of you have teams or it's been a struggle, I would encourage you to talk to the leadership about how you drive those engagements through and show the value and power of the work that you guys do every day, particularly within the marketing organization. Because as much as I'd be curious to know, it's like in my organization, that's kind of natural because what we sell. But in previous roles I've been in, I don't know if those conversations were happening. And if you work in a large organization, those silos become super simple. So the more we can bring that stuff together, and certainly something that I talk with other leaders about, it creates a stronger marketing organization in general. And so I think just to wrap it up, if there was kind of tips or things to take away from this is if you're not if you don't sit within a marketing organization and you don't feel those relationships are strong, I would encourage you to perhaps build those and use events and use the role that you play and the impact that you have in really reaching your customers in a more direct way as an opportunity to show value of events within your marketing mix. If you're not using platforms, shameless plug, I'd encourage you to consider using one, because then you get all that data and you go, ta-da! I work in an incredibly data-heavy organization. If I don't walk in with some numbers, I may as well leave the room, which funnily enough, personally is not my wheelhouse, but I'm learning a lot about Excel spreadsheets because I don't have a choice. But what is really nice is that we can take these engagement touch points, and I suddenly, as a marketer, can then go, wow, when I look at all these people that are here, this is the type of people that we're seeing in the room. This is the content that is relevant to them. And ultimately, these are like verticals. So it starts to give us a really clear view of how I, driving this enterprise marketing engine, can do a better job of reaching customers. I would also encourage you, if you're not doing a consistent sync across the aisle, to just have those conversations about marketing strategy and all the outputs from events that can inform the other parts of particularly digital marketing. If you're not using content and breaking it up for social, why wouldn't you? I would assume most of us are doing that now, but I still run into certain companies that are like, oh, well, I don't want to post an hour-long video. It's like, cut the video. Be mindful when this is happening of how you can capture things in a constructive way so you arm yourselves with content and you're not having to redo things 3 times. And systems like Cvent, and there's others that are out there, but one of the things that Cvent enables, because we came from this live events world, we understand those connection points, so you can use one platform and bring it all together in a way that, again, can show that value in a way that is super important to the business, and that's what leadership tends to care about. So with that, I will stop and see if anyone has any questions on what I talked about. I know the post-lunch malaise, even I'm babbling my words. I hope that was useful and gave you guys a few tips and all that. And we'll be out at the stand if you guys want to chat further. And with that, I was quick. Ooh, I got done early. Yeah, with that, I'll finish. Thanks.